Oneworld is unique in Star Trek in that it has all the feel of a frontier world, but minus all that wonder because, well, it's not even on the frontier. It's actually rather easy to access, for not one, but three of the galaxy's biggest powers. I am talking about Nimbus 3, third planet of the Nimbus system, and one that has a very unfortunate past. While it has only had one outing in the canon, that of the film The Final Frontier, it has enjoyed, no, wrong word, weathered numerous other events across apocryphal media. Hi, Rick here again, and this time looking into the world of Nimbus 3, famous for its wildlife, and the fishing is terrific, as the slogan goes. Statistics first. The world is a margin L class, meaning that it can support humanoid life. It's just not optimal nor recommended. It has 2 moons and 1 ocean that apparently does not have tidal effects, despite the proximity of these satellites. Maybe their gravitational pull is far too weak? It has a single landmass that is predominantly desert, an arid rock, and a single ocean called the Mossy Sea. The temperature on a cold day is around 25 degrees Celsius, and this gets even hotter the more inland you go. The centre of this landmass is known as the Badlands, which is comparable to Vulcan's Forge, except bigger and bracketed by weathered mountains, eroded by the sand-blasted winds. Whatever tectonic activity raised them has long since faded. Breaking up the expansive desert are further ranges, valleys, but mostly vast undulating dunes of nothing but sand. Rainfall from the oceans very rarely makes it far inland, so why settle this world at all? Well, there are 2 reasons, but only one that's stuck. Its location, which has fluctuated with various retellings, places it in the Federation Romulan neutral zone, but more than this, near the Klingon border, making it a world with a breathable atmosphere right at the linchpin between the Alpha and Beta Quadrant's biggest political players. However, it was not seized as a prize of war nor as an asset in battle, but settled out of an optimistic if naive quest for peace. After the Federation-Klingon War of 2256-57, where the Empire sought to stabilise itself through conflict with the Federation, tensions remained high between the 2 powers. Not long after this, the Romulans began to make new forays into both Klingon and Federation space, making relations between the 3 powers more unstable and tense. This reached boiling points between the UFP and fledgling KDF when in 2267 war was declared near Organia. This was ultimately ended by an enforced treaty from the Organians, but highlighted the powder keg that was the political landscape at the time and a clear signal to the powers that be that something needed to change. So it was that Ambassador Robert Fox brought on board diplomats from the UFP, Jitanian, the Klingons Lugok, and the Star Empire's Detran to reach an accord between the powers and attempt something new. The founding of a colony world where each of the 3 powers would have an equal say in its governance and be made from settlers from each of their territories, a planet of galactic peace. The idea was a noble one, and Nimbus selected to be the location. Soon plans were made to prepare the world for terraforming, and a site was set up to be the capital city, known simply as Paradise. The world was advertised throughout the Federation to bolster morale, and it's from this campaign to attract volunteers we get the slogan, which was premature at best. However, in 2268, Ambassador Detran was killed on its surface during a riot. So, great start. This despite the fact that weapons were banned on the surface, as inhabitants basically forged their own. On top of this, while the Federation began to settle the colony in earnest, the Romulans and Klingons used the site to exile their undesirable elements, so 2/3 of the population were basically already annoyed at being here, and it only took 20 years overall for the whole plan to fall apart. Needless to say, the terraforming plans never reached fruition. One good thing may have come from the discussion at least, however, as it was during this year that the Romulans were seen with Klingon-style D7s, suggesting a trade of technology may have occurred in the wake of a dialogue between the Federation's mutual aggressors. Paradise City remains the capital, but neither name really fits. It is not a paradise, just a dusty walled encampment of forlorn souls, and it's barely big enough to be called a village, let alone a city. There are other settlements across the surface, mostly centred along the eastern shore, much closer to the ocean, and these include Lonely Town, Happy Meadows, and Rhodes End. Two others, Dead End and Faraway, lie across the Badlands. Additionally, plans to construct an orbital facility never materialised either, so the planet was left without a spaceport. This, plus its location, on the border of three differing powers, meant that no traffic ever passed through the system, because the neutral zone prevented it. The only vessels that arrived at Nimbus were those who set out for Nimbus, the occasional supply ship, and rapidly decreasing colonist transports. Management of the planet fell to a representative of each government. However, with few settlers, no political sway, and almost no traffic, the position held precious little responsibility. This is probably why all the representatives got along, mutual boredom and resignation to the hand they had been dealt. In 2287, the Federation and two empires still retained their symbolic presence there, with St. John Tabot representing the United Federation, General Cord of the Klingon Empire, and a new arrival, the Romulan diplomat, Caitlin Dar. Paradise had a single tavern, the Watering Hole, and its back offices functioned as the headquarters for the diplomats. This was likely originally supposed to be the temporary offices for Nimbus 3's government, to be replaced as the city grew, but of course it never did. It does, however, house the only communications device that can reach off-world. By this time, people had been bartering their way off-world, and the already diminishing population decreased further. In 2287, Cybok led his brainwashing cult to the City of Paradise in order to continue his quest for Shakari, and since Nimbus's founding, that was the most significant event that it had ever played host to, a pit stop for the Enterprise. The planet's decline continued, and eventually the Federation was forced to publicly concede that the notion of a joint settlement was too optimistic and a few centuries too early. They began to recall their staff, and by 2318 the UFP had no personnel left on its surface, although they never released their partial claim on the world. So rather than being the haven it was supposed to be, it was more or less stuck in this arid limbo. It is probably around this time that the Romulan presence began to increase, now that the Federation had abandoned the planet in all but name. It's not known exactly when it happened, but the Tal Shiar eventually began to set up shop there, keeping to themselves as much as possible. Starfleet would apparently have no knowledge of the Tal Shiar's presence here until 2384, but we'll get to that in a minute. During the late 2360s, however, it seems that the UFP decided to make a second effort with Nimbus 3. Having never released their claim on the world, they were well within their rights to attempt to settle it again, and the Federation began to do just that. But what poor timing! Because only a few years later, as progress was beginning to be made in restoring some semblance of the 24th century to the world, the Dominion War erupted and Starfleet was forced to cut back on its extensive colonisation efforts for the war. This lasted until 2375, and by that time, a familiar tale had unfolded on Nimbus. People had bartered their way back off-world, given up, or just plain disappeared. Then, in 2382, the Federation learned of the upcoming Romulan supernova, and Admiral Picard began his audacious plan to aid the Romulan people. As estimates of the supernova were revised and revisited by Starfleet observers, who themselves were not allowed into Romulan space to verify them, it became clear that Nimbus would be one of the systems within range of this subspace stellar explosion. In 2384, the USS Verity, the only ship allowed to pass into or near Romulan space, was sent to evacuate Nimbus 3. By the time that it got there, it discovered that the planet had seen a significant increase in Romulan civilians, but they were prevented from evacuating them for some undisclosed reason. Shortly after this, the Romulan Star Empire warned the Verity that they would take over the evacuation of Nimbus, something that seemed to oppose the earlier agreements Picard had been working by, but he was bound to acquiesce. The whole thing reeks of a Tal Shiar cover-up. The theory was that the Star Empire did not know that there was a base on Nimbus 3 and gave the Verity the go-ahead, But then the Tal Shiar swooped in for the cover-up. The cruelest thing, however, was that the Tal Shiar extracted some civilians and killed the rest, because they would have been a security risk if relocated to UFP territory. This is something that the Star Empire denied ever happened, and the Verity had not been there in person to check. However, the planet was eventually spared destruction, it seems, by the actions of Ambassador Spock and his collapsing of the supernova with red matter. So Nimbus and its dejected history gets to continue on. The following tales are now from Star Trek Online's continuity, so keep in mind this is liable to be overwritten. By the 25th century, a third effort had been made to colonise the planet, but this time the offer of settling was thrown wide to all comers, not just the Federation, Klingons and Romulans. To its credit, this worked, and the world saw an influx of new inhabitants, and the Orion Syndicate. With Starfleet still adopting an off-hands approach to the planet, as it was distracted with other matters, the inhabitants attempted to form their own policing force called the Peacekeepers. However, this fell to corruption, as one of the few Starfleet officers now posted there, Lieutenant Haverson, eventually betrayed the Peacekeepers to the Orion Syndicate, and they were forcibly disbanded. By 2409, the leader of the Syndicate, Melanie Diane, ruled over Nimbus through her proxy, Hassan the Undying, who is holed up in the mountain ranges outside of Paradise, in a converted cavern system called Shangdu. One good thing came out of the Orion Syndicate taking over though. Trade was now passing through the system, considering the neutral zone had been abolished. I mean, it's mostly a black market trade, but they did establish a spaceport in orbit at last, so that's something. The Tal Shiar have also set up back in Installation 18, using it as a research post for their Borg technology and other experimentation, bringing in people from other territories with their allies, the Alachi. It's a long story and I won't get into it here. So that sums up the history of Nimbus 3. It certainly has character and a real backwater feel to it. It's desolate, and every attempt to build it into something noble has failed due to happenstance or poor planning. It's almost as if the world itself simply resists being elevated to the lofty ideal held by the Federation, and it routinely falls into the corrupting elements of the Trek universe, the Tal Shiar, the Orion Syndicate. I kinda like that it hasn't improved, however. Don't get me wrong, if it were real, of course I'd want to see it remade and succeed, but it's not, so it makes for an amazing location for storytelling. Thanks for watching this rundown of the rundown planet that is Nimbus 3, where the wildlife are imported Romulan sandworms and the fishing is non-existent. Thanks again, I've been Rick, and goodbye.